Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here today. Let me begin with a blunt truth. Donald Trump is in far deeper trouble than even I imagined. For years, he has skated past scandals, brushed aside accountability, and sold a brand built on division and deception. But today the walls are closing in. The headlines no longer flatter. The investigations no longer pause. Trump is discovering what every citizen must eventually face, the rule of law. This is not just political theater. It is the reckoning of a man who believed himself untouchable. He once claimed he could do anything, say anything, and get away with it. But the courts are not swayed by applause, and prosecutors are not impressed by slogans. His bravado is meeting the cold steel of justice, and it is crumbling before our eyes. When we talk about Donald Trump today, we are no longer simply talking about a political figure positioning himself for another campaign cycle. We are speaking about a former president of the United States entangled in a web of legal challenges unprecedented in American history. The very phrase mounting legal challenges feels almost understated. Each week, each headline seems to deliver another case. It's another indictment, another revelation. And the key question, the hook that pulls us in, is this: how many battles can one man fight before the weight becomes unbearable, before the very system he once claimed to command now turns decisively against him? Consider the sheer scale of what Trump is facing. It is not one lawsuit or a single investigation, but a mosaic of legal cases spanning from New York to Georgia, from federal courts to state tribunals. At the heart of these cases are allegations that strike directly at the foundations of governance, mishandling of classified documents, interference in democratic elections, financial fraud, and incitement of insurrection. Each one of these charges would be monumental for any leader. Combined, they create a storm of historic proportions. This is not political gossip. It is the machinery of justice grinding forward slowly but inexorably. For years, Trump cultivated an image of invincibility. He was the businessman who beat bankruptcy, the television personality who thrived on controversy, the politician who defied every conventional rules and still ascended to the presidency. His narrative was simple. No scandal could touch him. No accusation could bring him down, because his supporters would always rally and his adversaries would always stumble. Yet here lies the paradox. Legal challenges operate under a different logic than political ones. In politics, perception can often outweigh reality. In courtrooms, facts, evidence, and the rule of law matter more than rallies or applause lines. That is why this moment is fundamentally different. Uh, the hook for the American public is not just about Trump's personal fate, but about the precedent being set. For the first time in modern history, a former president is being forced to stand before the courts and defend his actions as a private citizen. The symbolism here is staggering. If justice is applied equally, it sends a message that even the most powerful are accountable. If it falters, if the process bends under political pressure, it risks shattering public faith in the impartiality of the law. Either way, the consequences ripple far beyond Trump's own career. Another dimension that makes these legal troubles so profound is the timing. Trump is not only a defendant, he is simultaneously a leading contender for the presidency. The collision between campaign rallies and court appearances creates a spectacle never seen before in American politics. Imagine the visual contrast on one day, a man on stage proclaiming himself the future of the nation, on the next, the same man seated before a judge listening to charges that could strip him of his freedom. This duality is not only dramatic, it is destabilizing for the political system itself. How can a country navigate the possibility of electing a leader who may at the same time be convicted of crimes against its institutions? And let us not underestimate the psychological weight of these challenges. Even for a figure as combative as Trump, the constant grind of depositions, hearings, and court filings exacts a toll. It drains time, money, and energy, resources that in any normal campaign would be directed toward persuasion and outreach. His rivals, both Republican and Democratic, watch closely, knowing that every new indictment becomes both a weapon and a wound. Supporters may dismiss one case as a witch hunt, perhaps even two. But when the list grows longer and the evidence more detailed, doubt begins to seep even into the most loyal corners. Ultimately, the phrase mounting legal challenges masks a deeper reality. Donald Trump is no longer merely battling for votes. He is battling for legitimacy, for credibility, for survival in the eyes of history. And that raises the haunting question that echoes in courtrooms and living rooms alike. Can a man so engulfed in legal peril credibly claim to lead a nation governed by law? The answer is not yet written, but the process is underway. And the gravity of this moment is impossible to ignore. When we think of American politics, the images that usually come to mind are campaign rallies, debates, policy speeches, and an endless cycle of polls that rise and fall like waves on the ocean. Yet today, the image of Donald Trump is increasingly less about podiums and flags and more about courtrooms and judges' benches. The transition is striking. A man who once commanded the largest political stages in the world now finds himself standing before the law, forced to answer questions that no campaign slogan can deflect. The question that resonates across America and beyond is simple yet profound. Can a political career survive when it is constantly interrupted, even overshadowed by legal proceedings? The shift from politics to courtrooms is not just symbolic, it is practical, visible, and undeniable. Instead of dictating the terms of national conversation with fiery rhetoric, Trump now sees his schedule dictated by subpoenas, arraignments, and trial dates. Instead of choosing where and when to speak, he is compelled to appear where the law requires him to be. This is the new reality for a man who once relished total control over his public image. No longer is he free to define the arena of battle. The arena has changed, and the referees are not voters or pundits, but judges and juries. What makes this moment so compelling is the sheer contrast it creates. One day, Trump addresses a crowd of thousands, insisting he is the victim of a conspiracy, rallying his supporters with the familiar language of grievance and defiance. The very next day, he sits silently as prosecutors lay out charges of fraud, election interference, or mishandling classified information. The hook here is the clash between two narratives: the Trump who declares himself America's savior and the Trump who must defend himself against America's laws. For a nation that thrives on spectacle, the collision of these two roles is nothing short of historic. This shift also forces us to confront an uncomfortable question: what does leadership mean in a democracy when a candidate is as present in the courtroom as on the campaign trail? Traditionally, campaigns have been about ideas, policies, and visions for the future. Trump's campaign, however, is increasingly about his own legal survival. The issues that dominate his speeches are not healthcare, climate, or foreign policy, but indictments, prosecutors, and judges. In essence, his political narrative has become inseparable from his legal battles, blurring the lines between campaigning and defending. There is another dimension to this transformation, one that speaks to the very structure of American politics. A courtroom is not a campaign stage. It is a place where rules are enforced, facts are scrutinized, and consequences are determined by law rather than popularity. For Trump, this environment is alien. He has long thrived in spaces where charisma and defiance carry the day. In a courtroom, however, defiance is not a strength, but a liability, and charisma does not outweigh evidence. The gravity of this shift cannot be overstated. Trump is operating in an arena where his usual weapons, sarcasm, bravado, and spectacle, have little impact. The political consequences are immense. Every courtroom appearance competes with every campaign rally. Every new charge risks overshadowing his messaging on other issues. Rivals seize on the narrative, reminding voters that a candidate fighting legal wars may not have the capacity or the credibility to lead a nation facing global challenges. Supporters, on the other hand, are asked to believe that every indictment is proof of persecution, every charge a political attack. But even among loyalists, there is a limit to how long such a narrative can sustain momentum when the reality of court documents and testimonies grows heavier by the day. Ultimately, this movement from politics to courtrooms is more than a story about Donald Trump. It is a reflection of how deeply law and politics have become intertwined in America today. His trials are not just about one man's fate, but about the credibility of the rule of law itself. Will the legal system prove strong enough to hold a powerful figure accountable, or will it bend under the weight of political pressure and polarization? The hook is not just Trump's survival, it is whether democracy itself can withstand this unprecedented collision of campaign and courtroom. Trust is the lifeblood of any democracy. Without it, elections lose legitimacy, institutions lose authority, and leaders lose their moral claim to govern. For Donald Trump, declining public trust is not just a political inconvenience. Uh, it is an existential threat to his credibility, his campaign, and his place in history. The hook is undeniable. How can a man ask a nation to trust him with the future when growing segments of that very nation no longer trust him at all? Throughout his rise, Trump thrived on defying expectations and shattering norms. His base celebrated him as an outsider who refused to play by the rules of the political establishment. Yet this same defiance, once a source of strength, is now one of the primary reasons trust is eroding. Every new indictment, every revelation of misconduct, every courtroom drama chips away at the perception that he is a leader capable of acting in the nation's best interest. For many Americans, the steady drip of controversy has moved from background noise to undeniable evidence of unfitness. Trust is not lost all at once. It erodes slowly, piece by piece. Consider the arc of Trump's presidency and its aftermath, repeated claims of a stolen election, the violent chaos of January 6th, the mishandling of classified documents, and now the growing list of legal battles that demand accountability. Each episode is not isolated, it accumulates in the public consciousness. Uh, the lingering question becomes, if a leader cannot be trusted with the truth, the law, or the peaceful transfer of power, how can he be trusted to govern again? The most compelling hook lies in the duality of Trump's support base. On one hand, his core loyalists remain convinced that every attack against him is a conspiracy, every charge a witch hunt. They place trust not in institutions, but in Trump himself, seeing him as a singular figure battling corruption. On the other hand, independent voters, moderates, and even segments of his own party are growing weary of defending a man who is constantly under investigation. Here is the paradox: while Trump's inner circle of supporters grows more committed, the broader public is steadily turning away. A political movement cannot thrive indefinitely if it is fueled only by loyalty and not by trust. The numbers tell a deeper story. Polling shows erosion among suburban voters, younger generations, and moderate conservatives who once tolerated Trump's style for the sake of policy gains. These groups now express doubts about his honesty and his ability to lead responsibly. In politics, perception often shapes reality. When voters begin to view a candidate as untrustworthy, it becomes increasingly difficult to change that perception, no matter how many rallies are held or speeches are given. Trust, once broken, is nearly impossible to rebuild. This decline in trust has implications beyond the campaign trail. It spills into America's image abroad, where allies question whether the U.S. could once again elect a leader so entangled in legal and ethical turmoil. It reverberates through institutions at home as courts, legislatures, and the media struggle with the challenge of holding a former president accountable while maintaining credibility with the public. The erosion of trust in Trump becomes, in effect, a test of trust in democracy itself. Perhaps the most striking hook is this: Donald Trump built his political identity on the idea that he alone could fix a broken system. Today, the very system he sought to lead, the legal system, the electoral system, the system of public accountability, is revealing its doubts about him. He asks voters to trust him with power again, but the evidence piling up suggests that trust is precisely what is slipping through his grasp for a man who thrives on dominance. The loss of trust is not just a weakness, it is the undoing of his narrative. The true measure of Donald Trump's troubles cannot be captured solely by indictments, courtroom battles, or poll numbers. The deeper question is this: what do his actions and the nation's response reveal about the health of American democracy itself? The impact of Trump's ongoing legal and political struggles is not confined to one man. It radiates outward, testing institutions, straining norms, and exposing fractures that were long concealed uh, beneath the surface. The hook is sobering. Are we witnessing the resilience of democracy in action, or are we watching the early signs of its decline? Trump's presidency and its aftermath have challenged the very foundations of democratic governance. At the heart of these challenges lies the principle of accountability. A democracy thrives when laws apply equally to all citizens, regardless of power or status. Yet the mere fact that a former president must be indicted multiple times to face accountability reveals both the strength and fragility of the system. On one hand, it is a triumph of the rule of law that no individual is above it. On the other, it exposes just how vulnerable institutions are to manipulation, delay, and partisan influence. The events of January 6th remain one of the starkest symbols of this democratic test. A sitting president refusing to accept the results of a free and fair election inspired a violent assault on the very seat of government. For many Americans, the memory is still raw and the implications still unresolved. The hook that haunts us is this: if democracy can be so easily shaken by one man's refusal to concede, how strong is it truly? Trump's refusal to acknowledge electoral defeat not only undermined trust in elections, but also emboldened a dangerous precedent that the will of the people can be disputed, delayed, or disregarded if it serves political ambition. The impact is visible in how Americans view their institutions. Confidence in elections has eroded, especially among Trump supporters who continue to insist, despite overwhelming evidence, that the 2020 election was stolen. Trust in the media has fractured further, with partisan divides creating parallel realities where facts are contested and truth itself is politicized. Even the judiciary, once regarded as above partisan conflict, now finds itself accused of bias depending on whether it rules for or against Trump. Democracy depends on faith in these institutions, yet Trump's rhetoric and conduct have weakened that faith, leaving the country more polarized and suspicious than ever. Another layer of impact is global. Democracies around the world look to the United States as a model, a symbol of constitutional governance. When America struggles to enforce accountability for its leaders, it sends a troubling signal to allies and adversaries alike. If the world's most established democracy wavers in holding a former president to account, what message does that send to countries where authoritarian figures cling to power through manipulation and repression? The hook here is international. The strength or weakness of American democracy reverberates far beyond its borders. There is also the practical question of governance in the years ahead. If Trump continues to dominate political life while simultaneously facing criminal charges, the nation risks becoming locked in a cycle of division where every election is less about policy and more about personal survival. This corrodes the democratic ideal that leadership should be a contest of ideas, not an endless replay of scandals and grievances. When voters cast ballots more out of loyalty to a personality than belief in a vision for the future, democracy loses its sense of direction. Trump's impact on U.S. democracy is therefore not simply a matter of his legal fate. It is about the choices America now faces. Will the institutions of justice and governance prove durable enough to withstand unprecedented strain? Or will political expedience and polarization weaken them to the point of dysfunction? The answer is unfolding in real time, and it carries implications not only for the next election cycle, but for the very idea of democracy itself. Leadership in a democracy is not defined solely by power, popularity, or even electoral success. At its core, leadership is bound by accountability, the principle that those who hold authority must answer to the law, to institutions, and ultimately to the people. In the case of Donald Trump, this principle has been pushed to its limits. The central hook here is unavoidable. Can a democracy truly survive if its leaders are not held accountable for their actions, even at the highest levels of power? Trump's political career has been built on testing boundaries, stretching norms, and daring institutions to challenge him. Often he escaped consequences by reframing scandals as political attacks, convincing his supporters that every investigation was part of a grand conspiracy to silence him. For years, this strategy seemed to work. But accountability, though delayed, has a way of catching up. The indictments now facing him, ranging from election interference to mishandling classified materials, represent more than just legal charges. They embody a reckoning with the idea that no leader can stand above the system of laws that governs the nation. Accountability is not only about punishment, it is about precedent. What happens if a former president faces no consequences for attempting to subvert an election? What happens if mishandling state secrets is excused because of political influence? The danger is not confined to one individual, but to the entire fabric of democracy. If leaders learn that the law bends in their favor, that their office grants them immunity, then accountability collapses, and with it, the legitimacy of democratic governance. The hook is stark. If Trump avoids accountability, future leaders may see it as permission to act without restraint. This moment also raises deeper questions about the balance between politics and justice. Critics argue that prosecuting a former president risks dividing the country further, that it appears partisan or politically motivated, but failing to prosecute sends a darker signal that leaders can operate with impunity if they wield enough influence. The very tension between these two perspectives highlights why accountability is so difficult and yet so essential. Democracies do not collapse overnight. They weaken gradually through compromises that excuse misconduct in the name of stability. Trump's case forces the United States to confront whether it will choose stability without accountability or accountability as the foundation of true stability. The principle of accountability also matters for leadership beyond Trump himself. Citizens watch closely to see whether justice is applied fairly. If Trump is held accountable, it reaffirms the message that all leaders, present and future, must abide by the same rules as ordinary citizens. If not, it deepens cynicism and erodes trust in government. Already, public trust in institutions is fragile. Many Americans believe elites operate under a different set of rules. The way Trump's cases are resolved will either reinforce or challenge that perception. On a global stage, accountability for leadership resonates even more powerfully. The United States has long positioned itself as a defender of democracy and the rule of law. But how credible is that message if it cannot hold its own leaders to account? Autocrats around the world are watching closely. If America shows that its leaders are untouchable, it provides justification for authoritarian figures elsewhere to cling to power without fear of consequence. Conversely, if the United States demonstrates that even a former president must answer to the law, it strengthens the global message that democracy, though fragile, can still uphold its values. The larger truth is that accountability is not an option. It is the very essence of democratic leadership. A president wields enormous influence, but that power must always be balanced by responsibility. Trump's current battles illustrate what happens when accountability is delayed, when misconduct is tolerated until it threatens to destabilize the very system designed to contain it. The hook then is not just Trump's fate, but the nation's Will accountability for leadership be enforced, or will America signal that the highest office offers immunity from consequence? Donald Trump's mounting troubles are often described as his personal crisis. His court cases, his indictments, his declining credibility. But to frame this moment solely as a personal downfall misses the larger story. What is unfolding is not just about one man's future, it is about the test facing an entire nation. The hook that demands our attention is cleared if democracy cannot hold one of its most powerful figures accountable. What does that reveal about its strength, and what does it mean for the future of the American experiment itself? Every democracy is defined by moments of reckoning, and this is one of them. Trump's situation forces Americans to decide whether the principles written into the Constitution, equality before the law, checks and balances, accountability of leaders, are living realities or simply lofty ideals. The stakes go beyond his campaign rallies, his legal strategy, or his media battles. The true stakes lie in whether the United States can prove to itself and to the world that its institutions are resilient enough to withstand one of the greatest stress tests in modern political history. The personal and the national are now intertwined in ways that cannot be separated. Trump's defiance of electoral outcomes in 2020 was not simply a dispute about one race. It challenged the very mechanism through which power changes hands in a democracy. His handling of classified documents is not just about paperwork, it is about whether the rule of law applies to those entrusted with the nation's most sensitive secrets. His rhetoric against prosecutors and judges is not merely campaign bravado. It is an assault on the legitimacy of the judicial system itself. Each of these controversies may bear his name, but each carries implications for the survival of democratic norms. The deeper test, however, lies in the public's response. Will Americans demand accountability, or will they grow desensitized, treating scandal as just another chapter in a long running drama? If citizens become numb to misconduct at the highest levels, democracy weakens from within. The hook is unsettling. A nation's institutions are only as strong as the people's willingness to defend them. When apathy replaces vigilance, leaders can act without fear of consequence, and liberty begins to erode. The test is also political. If Trump manages to maintain significant support despite facing multiple indictments, it reveals something profound about polarization in America. It suggests that loyalty to individuals may now outweigh loyalty to institutions, that partisan identity may eclipse the basic values of accountability and truth. This would mark a dangerous evolution in democratic culture, where leaders are judged not by their actions, but by the fervor of their base. A democracy where partisanship overwhelms principle is a democracy at risk. Internationally, this test carries symbolic weight. America has long claimed to be a beacon of democracy, a model for others to follow. Yet its handling of Trump's troubles, will either reinforce or undermine that claim. If the United States shows that even a former president can be held accountable, it strengthens its credibility abroad. If not, authoritarian leaders in other nations will point to America's weakness as justification for their own abuses of power. The hook here is global America is not only testing itself, it is being tested in the eyes of the world. Ultimately, Trump's predicament is less about whether one man wins or loses, and more about whether a nation proves itself capable of upholding the values it professes to cherish. This is why it is a national test, not just a personal one. The outcomes of his trials, the decisions of the courts, and the reactions of the public will all shape the answer to a question as old as the Republic. Can democracy survive the strain of division, corruption, and ambition, or will it falter when confronted with its hardest test? The answer will not simply define Trump's legacy. It will define America's